It was the early 2000s, and the North American bus market was in the midst of change. A new bus maker was making their presence known. The Nova Bus Corporation was gaining steam quickly after their rough start in the mid-90s. Nova's momentum left New Flyer Industries and Orion on the back foot. While the LFS dominated, New Flyer had a plan, and developed two new models, with one being Nova's biggest challenge yet. The D40 LFR was first introduced in 2005 and was essentially a D40 LF with newer engines and transmission, as well as an updated streamlined design. The front of the buses was slightly more aerodynamic and the rear was smoothed out. The following year, the natural gas variants were introduced to the LFR lineup, followed by the articulated variants and hybrids over the years. The buses would start to appear on transit networks in 2006, with the Coast Mountain Bus Company ordering 45 C40 LFRs, 57 D40 LFRs, 16 D60 LFRs, and 38 DE60 LFRs. Other agencies would also order the LFRs, with notable agencies including Mississauga Transit, Calgary Transit, Edmonton Transit System, and WestJet, as well as a variety of different operators across North America. The LFR line did have a few bizarre and strange configurations that didn't really do all that well or were very niche, such as the E40 LFR and E60 LFR. These buses were trolley buses built between 2005 and 2010, and were discontinued in 2014, with the Coast Mountain Bus Company in Vancouver and Philadelphia SEPTA being the only customers of the type. Most of the LFR family came with some variation of the Cummins ISL or ISM engines, which are known for their potent tunes when in motion. The C40 LFRs came with the Cummins West Point ISL-G engines, which were notably quieter than their diesel counterparts. Similarly, the D60 LFR came with a neutered Cummins ISM. Like their older siblings, the LFR family of buses had the same general design elements but came with some visual features that made them easier to differentiate, with the C40 being the most obvious. The D40 LFR was also very recognizable, as it was essentially the C40 without whatever that is in the middle. The D60 LFR and the E60 LFR were the most interesting buses, as they almost look identical, except for one big element. The DE60 has a larger hump on the roof in order to fit the hybrid components. The D60, not having any hybrid components, just has a regular air conditioning unit on the back. Now only if someone told Carvolf of the past this information. Details aside, how did the LFRs do in the wider market? Well, it wasn't bad news, but it also wasn't spectacular. The LFRs did sell well in the United States, but not as well as the LFS did. Crucially, New Flyer already had a leg up in the articulated bus segment, with the previous generation D60 LF, already beating Nova Bus in that market, who hadn't even come out with an articulated bus until 2009. The 40-foot variants did sell well and were pretty good and versatile, but they were still being undercut by the LFS. New Flyer also had some production issues during this time, which were causing more than a few problems of some agencies, which allowed Nova to capitalize. There were a few variants that didn't really sell that well in the LFR line, like the shorter 45-foot variants and whatever this is, but they had one big advantage: their longevity. This was not New Flyer's first rodeo, as they were designing and building bus platforms for centuries, and they had quite a few high-quality models during that time. As in the name of the model, the D40 LFR was technically being constructed on the D40 platform, which was in constant production since 1989, and went head-to-head with the Orion 5 and other such models, and up to this point, it was the most successful model in New Flyer's history. On the other end of the spectrum, Nova were still a relatively young company, and they've already made a big error with their first generation LFS model. And despite their success with agencies, their other models would have some quality issues. Like for instance, the Gen 2 Novas had a horrendous seating arrangement at the rear of the bus, allowing them to get easily crowded on heavy route loads. Not a good move. When most of the Novas go over any bump or rough roads, they sound like they're falling apart. Bus operators hated them for their tight quarters in the driver's compartment, leaving them with little room. They also made terrible training units. The early hybrids are flammable, and the Gen 4 Suburban model is hot steaming garbage. I think you get the point. The New Flyers, meanwhile, sound better over large bumps and have better seating arrangements for passengers and bus drivers alike. Overall though, the LFRs were a pretty quiet response to the LFS, and were still designed on an older platform. But the story isn't quite over yet. While the LFRs were being produced, a brand new platform was being developed, and when it released, it would bring them right to the top. In 2008, the first of the Xcelsior family of buses would make their debut at the APTA Auto Show in San Diego, California, and the CUTA Trans Expo in Windsor, Ontario. The first 35-foot diesel hybrid prototypes were constructed in 2009 for Connecticut Transit. The XD40 and XDE40 were the first models in 2008, followed by similar 35-foot models in 2010, the 60-foot variant in 2011, and the rest of the line from 2012 onwards. The inspiration for the Xcelsiors would make their debut around the same time: the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Both the bus and the jet had a very similar selling point: fuel efficiency and sustainability. In the case of the Xcelsiors, they were designed with a lighter frame, polyamide fuel tank, and interior floor made of composite materials. This would ideally allow the buses to be versatile on a variety of routes and have a substantial operating range. The Xcelsiors also contained a raised roof, allowing for passengers to have a much more comfortable ride. Understandably, transit agencies loved this concept, and the models sold well. Very well. The 35-foot buses and the fuel cells didn't really sell that well, but the 40-foot variants and the articulated variants sold well with existing NFI customers as well as new customers. In the US, the Xcelsior line was extremely popular. So popular that they pushed their competition out entirely, and they essentially created a monopoly over there. With Canadian agencies, The Xcelsiors were a bit more modest, with the exception of the XD40, which sold very well in Ontario. Not one single variant dominated the rest of them, as the XN40 and XDE40 were niche to different regions. The XDE40 and XDE60 are most prolific in Ontario, with a handful of the former operating in Lethbridge, Alberta, and a larger number of the latter operating in Vancouver. Vancouver is also where you'll find the XN40, which is the most prolific model in British Columbia, with BC Transit and the Coastbound Bus Company operating hundreds in their fleets. Older Xcelsior buses operated with the Cummins Westport ISLGs from the C40 LFRs, but have since switched to the Cummins L9 engines. The LFS struggled against the might of the Xcelsior, with the 3rd and especially the 4th gen heavily affected. The 4th gen Nova bus was still using the LFS platform from 1999, which was effective when the competition was using older platforms like the D40 and the Orion 7 platforms. But when the Xcelsiors showed up, the LFSs started to crack. The 4th gen hybrid units tend to be pretty top heavy, and list when taking corners, and at least by the riding experience, the platform at least looks and feels weighty compared to the lighter Xcelsior platforms, which may be a factor for the frequent breakdowns the hybrids had and the early retirement of a handful of units. Transitioning back to the Xcelsiors for a second, between 2012 and 2019, the CMBC and West Vancouver Municipal Transit combined to order 40 XD40s, 249 XN40s, and 232 XDE60s for a total of 521 vehicles from the Xcelsior family. Unfortunately, the XDE60 was just discontinued by New Flyer this year, with the new 2024 order that just arrived for the CMBC to replace the D60 LFRs, some of the last of the type built. At least I think. Please correct me if I'm wrong. After a few years when they were behind, the Xcelsiors helped New Flyer make up lost ground and catch up to Nova, thanks to their equally attractive body designs and innovative features. And also, you can't really go wrong with a New Flyer vehicle, at least most of the time. The Xcelsiors now are the best-selling bus family in New Flyer's history, surpassing the D40 family, with thousands of them revolutionizing bus networks across the continent, much like the 7087 is doing worldwide. All of this success started with the LFRs, transitioned to the Xcelsiors, quickly pushed New Flyer past Nova Bus once again to take the crown once and for all. But notice I didn't mention Orion. What exactly happened to them? Well, that's another story.